All right, I think we are good to go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Studio Sessions. If this is your first time tuning in, this is a monthly live session that we host where we interview fellow creative minds across design, marketing, and the content industry. We are Globe Content Studio. If you haven't heard of us, we are the content marketing agency of the Globe and Mail. What we do is we work with all kinds of partners and advertisers to connect their brands to our large news reading audience with original content and storytelling. My name is Shazia Khan. I am the social media strategist at Globe Content Studio. And if you've watched one of these sessions before, you'll notice that we're doing things a little differently this time. Last year, we mostly hosted these sessions on Instagram Live, and in another life, I think we hosted similar sessions on YouTube. But in 2022, as we've all heard, it's all about being meta and being all over the place and being multi-channel and all those fun things. So we thought for this year, why stay in one place? So we're hopefully coming to you live on a number of platforms, including LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Hopefully, I hope these are all hooked up. If you're having trouble seeing or hearing us on any of those platforms, please feel free to just drop a note in the comments or shoot us a tweet or a DM or something. This is very much like a test and learn situation we're trying out for the first time. So we'd love to get any feedback from you guys that we can to figure out what's working, what's not, what you like, what you don't like, which platforms you want us to use or not use, all of that good stuff. But yeah, with that said, let's just jump right in. So today, I'm actually being joined by my colleague, one of my studio partners in crime, Jessica Robinson, to discuss our upcoming Next in Creative report. It's really fun stuff. For those of you who don't know, Jessica is the content lead at Globe Content Studio. And fun fact, both Jessica and I, we have something in common. We're both pandemic hires. We both joined the studio post-COVID, post things shutting down. And I think Jess is actually the OG pandemic hire who joined the studio, I think the day or within a couple days of everything shutting down in March 2020. So she has been really instrumental in guiding our creative strategies and guiding our clients through this really tumultuous time, using her trademark journalistic storytelling and insights and really cool insights and principles to guide brands through a very interesting past couple of years. So she has tons of unique intel I'm excited to share with you guys. Jessica, welcome to the chat.
Thanks, Jazia. Happy to be here.
Thanks. All right. So with that said, I know everybody's Monday mornings are very busy, so let's just jump right in. We are right in the thick of the trend report season. I'm sure all of you have been inundated with a lot of emails and messages about this stuff. Maybe some of you out there just watched the Pinterest Predicts webinar that they just had on Thursday. Twitter just released a new bird's eye report, which is really cute. Instagram just released their first fully formal trends report this past year. Pretty much outside of social media, every agency, digital marketing entity of some kind puts out one of these things, but some watching may not have heard yet of our Next in Creative report. So are you able to summarize in a nutshell what is Next in Creative and kind of what makes it different?
Definitely. The first thing that makes Next in Creative different is that it starts as a presentation, not as a formal trend report. And it's really a forward-looking presentation that tries to reveal and contextualize what we at the studio are seeing as the emerging trends that ultimately represent the future of content marketing. And what else really makes it different is that we don't just focus on identifying or predicting what trends are to come, but because we're content marketers, we're really focused on the so what of it all. How can we take this insight, take this information and apply it for us, for our clients and our campaigns? And so in the actual presentation and the report that's coming out of it, we offer really explicit ideas for how to use these insights to drive opportunities for brands.
Awesome. So we've done Next in Creative. We've done this report a couple of times, and I know you've been a part of it. I think at least 2-3 reports deep, something like that. So you've got a little bit of background doing these sorts of things now. So how do you and the team put this report together generally? Is there a specific methodology you guys follow or any key indicators that you use to kind of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, this is a new iteration, I'm going to say, of Next in Creative, in that it used to be called State of Creativity, and this is our first year under our new banner. And it's the third year that we're doing this sort of trend report research in general. And to develop the insights for the report, we use the same insights-based approach to storytelling and research and discovery that we use in all of our actual content programs for clients. So we start with a three-pronged approach that includes our first-party proprietary data that's gathered through the Globe and Mail's AI platform, Sophie, and also Globe Insiders, which is a panel of readers who sign up to participate in surveys, give us their very honest feedback about what we're doing and what they like and what they don't. So that's the first prong. The second is we do a lot of, essentially journalism. It's the field research, the interviews and talking to real people about what matters to them. And then, of course, we round it out with third-party research that involves other reports and news and journalism and research that's been produced by other groups. And so leveraging all three of these pillars of research capabilities is what gets us the base level of insights. And then to take those insights, we join together as a group. We look at where the common trends are. What are people talking about across all of the different pillars? What's coming up again and again from a topic perspective, from a format perspective? What are the biggest problems and pain points that people are actively looking to solve in the market? And when we figure out what the strongest themes are across key categories, everything from auto to business to tech to beauty, we can figure out which are going to be influencing creativity in the year to come and help prepare us for the future as content marketers. And so that's when we really sift through the insights and figure out, okay, of what everyone's talking about, what has staying power? What are we still going to be talking about at the end of the year versus what will have fizzled out by, March?
Interesting. Yeah, cool. So kind of on that note, I was kind of curious, were there I'm sure every year is kind of different in its own unique way, but were there any interesting commonalities or recurring themes across all the trends you observed in the past year that maybe makes this past year stand out from the rest?
Yeah, we took a bit of a different approach this year. I mean, of course, it's a trend report, right? And when you're building a trend report, you start by trying to figure out, okay, well, what's a fad and what's a trend? A fad is going to be more of a short-lived craze, right? So, TikTok, feta pasta, great example of a fad. Trends are going to stick around longer. They're going to have more of a lasting effect on culture. You can really identify them by their impact and by their staying power. But when a trend remains consistently relevant for long enough, we have started to take notice and started calling them the building blocks or baselines for other emerging trends. And so ultimately, we're calling them baselines and fundamentals. These are former trends that we probably identified, 2019, 2020, and now they're ubiquitous necessities that actually have to be the initial step for all the other trends that we're putting together. So good examples of this is sustainability, diversity, nostalgia, things that years ago were, emerging niches or perhaps like the focus of a content campaign. They now underpin each new trend that we identify. And I would argue that of the 6 different fundamentals and baselines that we identified for this iteration of Next in Creative, I would say 5 out of 6 come up in every single trend. There's always, a little bit of room for differentiation, but there is no trend anymore that doesn't have to have some form of sustainability, for example, at its core, whether it's sustainability from a climate perspective, sustainability from like, is this sustainable for your workforce? It's coming up in all sorts of different ways. And that was different this year. That's not something that has been in the report in the past, but we felt it was really vital to highlight what these are and show how they're weaving into all the emerging trends without reducing something as ubiquitous as sustainability to calling it a trend.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I feel like that's so useful for people in our industry, especially in my industry, social media. It's like trends are so like a 5-minute fleeting thing that comes and goes, and it's like hard to know what to really hitch your wagon to. If it's just going to be gone in 5 minutes, then what's the point? It's good to like focus on, okay, what trends, if we can even call them that, is like worth investing time and resources into for like the long run. That's definitely such a good point. Okay, so let's get to the good stuff. So I'm sure a lot of people are like, what are these trends? Like, what are your predictions for the next year? So let's jump into some of them. We have, I forget how many it was. It was like 6 or 7 on the list, and we probably won't have time to like hop into all of them in a lot of detail today. But let's start with like if you had to pick one or maybe one or two that really stood out to you as like you thought were the most interesting or just like your favorite trends of the past year that you think were very useful for next year. Which ones would you focus on first?
Yeah. Ooh, picking favorites. So there are 7 trends in total in the Next in Creative report. Maybe I'll pick a couple, but my first one that comes to mind is the trend we called "Auto is the new tech playground." And I am not a car person. I don't own a car. I've never bought a car. I like to drive, but it's just not something that I've ever been really invested in from a consumer perspective. I work a lot with car brands and car companies. And Globe Drive is something that the Globe Content Studio has under its umbrella, and so we focus on it a lot from a work perspective. But when it comes to being a person who drives around a car, it's never been a huge thing for me. So when I was researching the topic for the purpose of the trend report in the initial stages, what really struck me is how much shift there's been, not so much in what the auto industry is doing, but in the way that the world is conceiving of the auto industry. The reason we call it "Auto is the New Tech Playground" for the trend's title is because essentially we've started treating the auto industry like the tech industry. And it goes well beyond Tesla, which has always been sort of the hybrid between the two industries, let's say, or it positions itself as that anyway. But it has started to be reflected not just in how car companies market themselves, but how they're seen, how they're evaluated, and ultimately how their stocks even perform. We had a bit of research that indicated that when the brands VW and Ford and GM made big announcements about their commitments to electric vehicles and or commitments to self-driving cars and investing in that sort of software development, their stocks went up anywhere between 50 and 140%. And so you've got these basically old school companies that are trading well above book value, like tech companies have been. And it's really showing that the market is finally sort of reflecting what car companies have said for a lot of years, which is, we're not just hardware, we're software. This is where the industry is going. And to see that really coming to life now is a really interesting shift that I think is important to pay attention to for sure. So yeah, that would be number one.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I also, yes, put me in the very small pool of probably the only last Ontarian who has not purchased a car during this pandemic.
I know. Well, and that's a huge part of it, right? Of course, is that all of a sudden everyone was relying on the need for autonomy, very different way. Like, it just didn't feel as safe to be on public transit. And a lot of that has been dispelled now, but especially in the early stages. And you add in, of course, the computer chip shortage, which comes up in cars just as well as it does computers or phones or anything else. And you're seeing even a used car market that we've never seen before from a demand perspective. And that is just compounding, like, car drops wasn't a thing before, like the way that, the new iPhone dropped was, but now it's basically the same practice. It's pretty synonymous. And so to know that a company like Ford has poached the Apple car guy, Doug Field, like, you're just seeing all of these synergies from an executive level, from an investment level, from a consumer level. They've never been more similar, in my opinion. And that's really what the trend report digs into in a way that I think is super fascinating.
Yeah, so it seems like it's definitely, if you're taking a page out of big tech strategy in some way for your own industry, it seems like you're probably on the right track. It definitely makes a lot of sense why the car world would be doing that right now. So yeah, that's a very fascinating one. Even as a non-driver like myself, or non
Exactly.
I'm like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Okay, cool. So that's one trend that I think is definitely something we should keep on our radar. Which trend, if you had to pick another one, which trend really surprised you or like came out of left field that you were not expecting to be kind of as big of a theme as it was this past year?
Yeah. There's an interesting one that I think didn't know about. Like, it was mostly in ignorance. And it's RPAs. And we've titled it the unsexy technology because it's RPA stands for robotic process automation. And it's,
Oh my gosh, everybody.
as like as a baseline, it's like about as like boring as you might think. Like it's like the most boring version of robotics on its surface level, right? That's what you think of when you come across the term, because when you hear robots, you think of um, Astro, like the Alexa on wheels, or
Yeah.
a robot that's coming into the car manufacturer's assembly line and like stealing jobs. That you picture a physical robot basically, but what this trend really digs into is the fact that we've been working with robots for a very long time. These robots are in Slack, in Salesforce, and Outlook, and it's anything that's automating the most boring, mundane, repetitive processes and tasks in our day to day work lives. And the advent of RPAs is really going to, we think, change the game, not just from a technical job perspective. Like it's pretty easy to see how that's going to affect like a developer's work, where they can sort of instruct the program to do something once, and then it can just automate that process over and over. But we think that it's actually going to start coming in for the creative fields, not taking away creativity. No robot or AI or machine learning can recreate human inspiration and idea and thought, but it can take away all of the most mundane, repetitive tasks that are still part of being, a content marketer or a strategist. You can take those off our plate so we can spend more time ideating and brainstorming. And so thinking of it that way was really interesting, and not something that I was considering as a trend at all until we dug into it here, which is funny because the Globe has been working in AI and RPA and all that sort of thing
Yeah.
for a long time, right? Like we've got Sophie, who I always joke is smarter than all of us, and she's our in-house AI who does exactly that. She automates the selection of best performing content and serves it up in a way that's going to generate the most value to our readers, and therefore, of course, also the most value to us as a company. And by offloading those processes to our little robot, Sophie, we're freeing up our journalists so that they can do investigative journalism, so they can chase down huge stories like the power gap or the latest Olympics deep dive into the eating disorders. Like that's not something an RPA can do, but it made it so that our people could do it. And that reframe of RPAs is really what's at the core of this trend for us. And it was super fascinating to me as a marketer.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've definitely gone on this journey from being very suspicious of the automation and the robotification of our industry, and being worried of like, what does that mean for me and my future career, to like almost, I won't say fully embracing it, but embracing it more and learning to like work alongside these robots. I feel like have been very instrumental for my career growth, and even just for us getting things done faster, more efficiently, and having more time to do things at a higher quality level, for sure. Like everything from, even as like a social media marketer, something as small as like being able to do automated rules in Facebook Ads Manager, to using tools like I'm sure a lot of people watching use Monday or Notion. Like we use Notion all the time to kind of keep ourselves on track and project manage our stuff. All those little like automation bots really go a long way to allowing us to do just so much more as human beings. It's like we
Yeah.
can work together. We're not working against each other. We can work with each other. The
No,
humans.
it's true. Like even thinking about like the shift to dynamic ad building versus static ads, right?
Yeah.
Like think about how much work it was for us to iterate ourselves to develop each of the different caption combinations and the different image combinations or visual assets. The fact that we can just throw it all into the machine and say, tell us what's going to perform best, is something we do as second nature now. But
Yeah.
it was a big shift. It was a big change when that knowledge became available. Now I can't imagine running a program without that.
We go
And
back.
exactly. And it's come to social media first, I'd say, like before content marketing, like from like a content creation perspective. So I'm really looking forward to, and I know we're already starting to do it for us at Globe Content Studio, is identify, where can we automate these repetitive tasks so that not only is it taking work off our plate, but we're getting these additional insights that we didn't have before. I think about, plugging in results from content programs so that we're auto generating up-to-date benchmarks. Like that's something that we're absolutely going to be working or are working towards, going to have in hand, I would say, sooner than later. And once we have that, we will never go back, because
Yeah, I
that's
know.
so valuable from an insights perspective, and it's going to create so much more value for our clients as well.
For
So
sure.
like, I'm super excited about it. No longer worried robots will steal my job.
They need us to like keep them in check too. So it's like
Yeah, they need
winging it.
us for their jobs. It's like, it's very symbiotic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word for it. Okay, cool. So we've talked a little bit about some of the insights and some of the trends in the upcoming report. So let's talk like action now. I know one thing that I struggle with is I'm an information sponge. I download all these reports. I love reading them and watching the webinars. Be like, wow, that's really insightful, or that's super interesting. And then when it comes to like, okay, what do I do with that? Like, who do I share this with information with? Like, how do I change my job to like benefit from this in some way? Sometimes I struggle with figuring out what those action points. So to make it real dead simple for anybody watching, I was thinking maybe we could share some practical takeaways anyone watching can use right now, maybe even as soon as today if they have the means to do so. So yeah, what are some like practical takeaways, maybe from one of the two or both of the trends we've talked about so far?
Yeah, it's a really important question for us, because it's sort of at the heart of why we produce Next in Creative. And like, listen, selfishly, it really helps us as content marketers know what's coming and think really critically, even while we're building the report, about how we can apply it. But we also think that it's sort of the missed opportunity in so many of the reports that we consume, whether they're being put out by agencies or platforms, et cetera, is that it gives you all the information, but it doesn't give you that head start into how to use it.
Yeah.
And so even when we're coming up with our trends, we're ensuring that we're not including any sort of trend that we can't devise a direct practical application for marketers. So it's not just in like, okay, now what do we do with it? It's really informing which trends we hone in on and focus on as well, which I think is part of also what sets us apart. And in the presentation, as well as the physical report that's coming out, we actually spell it out. We're not coy about like, oh, like all of the practical application is woven in. We literally have a section that says, so why does this matter? So what does this mean for content marketers? And we have sort of 3 bullet points for every single trend in the report, that spells out exactly how it works. And so, like to your point, a couple examples, starting with like the auto. If we know that we're seeing car companies be like tech companies, how can you market a car company like a tech company? That's sort of our initial thought starter when it comes to that trend. We know it's going to better resonate with the new generations of drivers. We know it's going to better reflect the direction that the auto industry is headed in. So we want to make sure when we're developing concepts that it fits in with that as sort of our basis of truth. What it also leads us into is our second point, which is auto brands are going to need an even clearer understanding of their, not just their value proposition or differentiation, but their technological differentiation from competitors, so that the marketing can double down on where their product differs. So if we're treating car companies like tech companies, we need to know what the software changes are. What are they doing differently or better than any of their competitors that are also playing in this new tech playground space? So ensuring that when you're answering a brief, you can answer that question is definitely something we've gleaned. And then finally, if we're moving into a technologically innovative space, how are you ensuring that your concept, whether it's the content itself or the platform that it lives on, reflects technically innovative content marketing? So, are you getting into the experiential? Are you leveraging augmented reality? What are the latest functions of the trending social media platforms? We haven't talked about it, but the ways in which TikTok is evolving at like lightning speed is one of our 7 trends. So how can you weave in what we've learned and know about TikTok into auto pitches? Where does it fit? So that's a good example too of the ways in which we try to ensure that our trends interrelate wherever it makes sense to, so that there's a cross application as well. Because ultimately, technologically innovative content marketing for a brand that we're saying is like a tech company now is going to result in these authentic synergies that position the auto brands in the way that they've been telling us they are the whole time. So those are the practical steps that we would encourage. If you're ever answering an RFP for an auto company or working with them as your own client.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about just like brass tacks, spell it out for me. Like what do I do? Like what is the benefit? I feel like that stuff is just so much more useful than just here's a bunch of information, you figure it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a trend that we didn't talk about as much in detail, but it's the repair, refurbish, and restore trend. It's
Right.
another one that I really love because, for one thing, I've decided that this is the year I learn how to embroider. I just think, and like so, I don't know it all, but I just think it's like the right time. And what our research showed in part was that it's the right time because the situation with inflation and people talking about whether recession's looming. You've also got, impending climate crisis that has been really compounded by the UN's recent report about basically code red. And so the conflation of those two sociocultural situations has actually put us in a similar position to 2008 when it came to repair, where, people started trying to mend their clothes. And you have the right to repair movement, which is, of course, focused heavily on electronics and the right to be able to take your Mac laptop to not Apple and get it repaired. And there's been a lot of movement in that space. And the reason I bring up this trend when it comes to the practical implications is that if you're not a fashion company, let's say, or a computer technological company, you might be thinking, how do I apply this trend that I'm not in the industry of in a way that makes sense for me? But something we identified again with TikTok is that there's just a huge appetite for DIY content in general. So how can you leverage DIYers in the space of repair in a way that makes sense for your client or your content or your brand, even if you're not a fashion company? Even if you're not a tech company, there are ways to hop on the repair trend through the overarching umbrella of DIY. You don't have to be doing exactly what is all over your TikTok feed in order to be capitalizing on the growth of a trend. So we make sure that our marketer takeaways are still posed in that way where it's not going to pigeonhole you. And I would argue that our suggestions for technologically innovative content marketing, of course, it's produced to apply to auto, but you don't have to be focusing on car companies in order for it to be applicable. So that's really part of it as well, is making sure that there's that cross application no matter what industry you're in.
For sure, it's like more than ever all these industries are intersecting and getting hit with the same things in different ways, so like that totally makes so much sense and is a really good takeaway. On the flip side, I know we always talk about like when we read these reports, when we get these insights, like, okay, I should start doing XYZ. But I think what we don't often spend enough time thinking about is like, I should stop doing ABC. So like, what are some of or what is maybe one or two or just one insight that you came across in this deep dive that you found like, oh, this is something that maybe marketers need to stop doing, or this is like a consistent mistake that we're making that maybe we should, moving into the next year, start moving away from?
Yeah, it's tough always because you don't want to focus on the negative, but in
Yeah.
order to make positive habits, you often have to, cut back on things that aren't working. And for us, one of the really important fundamentals, the baselines or building blocks that we talked about at the beginning, in addition to things like sustainability and diversity and nostalgia, is authenticity. It's a word that's been maybe overused a little bit recently. Um, but what it means to us at its core, and what I think is the most useful and valuable definition, especially for content marketers, is being what you say you are on the inside. Like that approach to authenticity is fundamental for any brand, not least of all because the upcoming generations will really call you out if you're not. And one of our trends touches on institutions shifting towards a language of decolonization. And what we say, and especially in the takeaways, but really throughout that whole trend section, is you can't just talk about it. You can't just say you're decolonizing as an institution, especially an institution with colonial roots. You have to be doing the sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes costly or difficult work of walking the talk. And we have an example in there of a brand that launched a BIPOC fund that didn't have any Indigenous people on its advisory board. They'd approached one person, and when they'd inquired about the overall governance for the board, they weren't satisfied with the answer, so they declined to participate. And then they just went ahead and launched the fund. And of course, the person who was asked was like, you can't call it BIPOC when there's no Indigenous people. That's kind of the I. And it resulted in an uproar. And the brand ended up having to put out a statement with an apology and saying we're going to pause the fund until we've made up this wrong. And it's just a really good example of needing to not just practice what you beyond that. It's about thinking really critically about, if I were to live this fundamental that I'm putting out in the world as being part of my brand, would I make this choice?
Yeah.
And it's that sort of gut check for yourself. So I suppose it's a bit more of a cautionary tale than a don't, but it's one that I think we're all susceptible to, and it's a really good one to learn from before you make the mistake.
Yeah, for sure. It's just about being like, maybe not necessarily like, don't join this conversation or don't join this certain trend outright, but just like being more thoughtful about it, trying to figure out like, okay, it's not just a trend. It's like you said, like it's a long form commitment to something. So, what am I going to do long term to really commit this to our values or our brand strategy? Like definitely, I feel like there's so many of those sorts of trends and brands trying to jump into social conversations on social media. And I feel like one really good example of when that happened to good effect was like when there was the whole Black Lives Matter media blackout. I think, was it last year? I can't tell the years apart anymore. But when everybody was posting those black squares in solidarity with, George Floyd and with the Black Lives Matter movement, one brand I think that was really successful with it was Nike, because they've actually been part of that movement for years, like long before that hashtag existed. So for them to post something on that day, it was not just performative. It was like, we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk, and here's what we're going to keep doing for many years to come. Whereas some other brands, when they posted on that day, it just feels very performative. So it's like, it's all about, yes, you can definitely be a part of those conversations, but just being very thoughtful and knowing that you can't just like pop in on a special hashtag day and then pop back out again. It's like, you got to commit.
Exactly. And thinking critically, like for our concrete takeaways in that section on decolonize this institution trend, which is a play on decolonize this place, which is a really fantastic grassroots movement based in New York. We talk about thinking about whether or not you are the right people to tell this story. And if not, how can you use your brand's platform to lift up the voices of the right people? It's not always about how can my brand weigh in on this in a way that feels authentic. Sometimes it's, should my brand weigh in, or is there a better way to further the conversation that doesn't put us first? And I know it can feel uncomfortable or counterintuitive to put marketing dollars behind something that doesn't have your brand right at the forefront, but moving this sort of conversation forward is so much more valuable, even for your brand, like not in a cynical way, but it's ensuring that you're engaging thoughtfully with the conversation, and it's so vital. And also realizing that movements are not trends. Like we have a line in the decolonize this institution trend that explicitly states decolonization is not the trend. The trend is institutions coming into the conversation of decolonization. But that's something that we feel is really important to differentiate, one to another. And it's certainly part of us trying to think really critically about, walking the talk ourselves.
For sure, for sure. All right. Well, I feel like we could talk about this like all day, but I know we have stuff to get to, and I'm sure our viewers have lots of stuff to get to on this fine Monday morning. So I think that's like a really good note to land it on. Pretty good stuff to work with here. So thanks so much for hopping in today and joining the live stream. I guess before we wrap things up for the day, we should probably share with everybody where you can actually download this Next in Creative report, where to watch out for it.
Yeah, I know we've talked a little bit like this presentation, this report, and everyone's like,
Yeah.
why don't I have it in my hand?
Yeah.
So what's great is that the presentation historically has been a little bit exclusive, a little bit like, we would do it for a select group of our clients and partners. But this year, for the first time, we're publishing it as a downloadable white paper. It's going to be available through LinkedIn. It's going to be, a fully read at your leisure, download and have it forever white paper PDF. It's coming out in the next few weeks, definitely by the end of February. And the best way to be up to date on when it's going to drop and ensure that you're one of the first people to get your hands on is to subscribe to our Globe Content Studio newsletter. You can find it at globecontent.studio/newsletter. If you're already a subscriber, you're ahead of the game, and you'll definitely be getting the download link directly. If not, ensure that you sign up, and you'll be the first to know when it's available. And again, it's 7 trends, each one with its 3 practical actionable insights for content marketers, no matter what field you're in, no matter what industry, and no matter who your client is. And we're really excited to hear what you think.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, definitely check that out, guys. Okay, so I think that wraps everything up. Thanks so much for everybody who's watching out there for joining us today. Jessica, thank you so much for the chat as well. It's really exciting, interesting stuff. I hope everyone out there found it just as inspiring as I did and is really galvanized to go and game up their 2022 marketing strategy with some of this info. Yeah, so with that said, our next monthly edition of Studio Sessions will be taking place at the end of February. So stay tuned for more details on that. We'll be, like we did with this one, we'll be posting more information as it draws a little bit closer, maybe like about a week or so beforehand. And we're going to try it again on multiple channels. So hopefully you can catch us in a bunch of places wherever you are on the interwebs. But yeah, so more to come on that stuff. Until next time, stay safe, everybody. Stay warm, and we'll see you next one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.